In 1896, the Supreme Court case of Plessy v. Ferguson established segregation as law. When segregation is law, it is referred to as de jure segregation. The decision of the case stated that segregation of races was legal as long as facilities were separate but equal. Facilities were hardly ever equal, especially in the South. Almost all public institutions in the South were segregated, including schools, hospitals, transportation, restaurants, and beaches were separate by and enforced by Jim Crow laws. Alabama even forbade whites and blacks from playing checkers together in parks. While most cities in the North didn't have Jim Crow laws, they did practice de facto segregation, or segregation by tradition or unwritten laws, so all parts of the country treated African Americans unfairly.
In 1956, Brown v. Board of Education occurred in Topeka, Kansas. Brown sued because there was an all-white school that was closer to his home with a better education. He could not send his daughter there because she was African American. His daughter had to go to an all-black school with lower education that was farther away from his home. The significance of Brown v. Board of Education was that it was directly challenging Plessy v. Ferguson. The result of this case was it was separate but equal, is now unconstitutional, begins the end of segregation, and is now illegal.
In 1957, in Little Rock, Arkansas, the Little Rock School Board had established a plan to gradually desegregate their schools, starting with Central High School. 9 African-American students volunteered to enroll. The Arkansas Governor Orville Forbes showed his opposition of desegregation by sending the Arkansas National Guard to block the students' entry, while mobs of white students yelled racist slurs at the black students. Eisenhower wasn't emphatic about the civil rights movement until now. He sent federal troops to Little Rock to protect the students as well as enforce the court's decision. Troops stayed there to escort and guard the students for the rest of the year. This demonstrated that the president would not tolerate open defiance of the law. As a result, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which established the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, which had the power to investigate violations of civil rights, gave the U.S. Attorney General greater power to protect the voting rights of African Americans, and it lacked teeth, but it was the first civil rights bill passed by Congress since the Reconstruction.
December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks' bus driver suggested that she gives up her seat. She refused, and the bus driver called the cops, and she had got arrested for breaking the law. At the time, blacks didn't have any rights, and she was standing up for not only herself, but all of her race. The result was the Montgomery bus boycott. The black community refused to ride buses to show that they did not agree with Rosa being arrested. Rosa said, "I didn't think I should have to stand up after I had paid my fare and occupied a seat. I didn't think I should have to give it up."
Easter weekend 1960, in the Deep South, the Freedom Riders and SNCC went to create a grassroots movement that involved all classes of African Americans to defeat racism and to attain equality. The Freedom Riders used white restrooms at bus stations and sat in the front row of the buses. It was dangerous for them to do these acts. African Americans were attacked in Birmingham, and pro-segregationists firebombed a bus in Anniston. The significance of this was to point out that after the Brown v. Board of Education segregation was supposed to be ended, and it was not. The results were a white mob attacked a bus in Birmingham, and a bus in Anniston was firebombed.
The Letters from a Birmingham Jail was a letter mailed by Dr. King during his stay in the city jail of Birmingham, Alabama. He was arrested after being part of the Birmingham Campaign, a nonviolent protest conducted by Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights and King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He was protesting segregation by Birmingham's city government and downtown retailers. This was written in response to a statement by 8 Alabama clergymen on April 12, 1963, called A Call for Unity, which acknowledged that social justices exist but should be handled in a courtroom rather than on the streets. He is quoted in this letter as saying, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to." He also expresses in this letter that all communities were interrelated and that nonviolent protests were the key to getting something done.
August 28, 1963, at the Lincoln Memorial, the March on Washington was one of the biggest political demonstrations in U.S. history. It was considered to be a model for peaceful protest. It built the momentum for the passage of civil rights legislation. It showed diversity. A little more than 1/4 of the speakers were white. All the rest were of different ethnicity.
In July 1964, the Civil Rights Act affected the entire country by setting out to end discrimination. They desegregated schools, banned segregation in public accommodations, individuals who violated people's rights were and could be prosecuted by the justice system. It also established the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, preventing job discrimination. The significance was to end discrimination in the workplace and on the streets. The results created a safe workplace and justice for those who discriminate.
In the summer of 1964, the effort to register as many African American voters in Mississippi as possible was later named the Freedom Summer. This would set up dozens of freedom schools, freedom houses, and community centers in small towns throughout Mississippi to aid the local black population. This would also form the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which was an alternative to the state's all-white regular Democratic Party. Before the volunteers arrived, 3 civil rights workers, Michael Schwerner, James Chaney, and Andrew Goodman, disappeared. The SNCC claimed that they were murdered, but state authorities denied these claims. President Johnson ordered a search for them, and they were found in a dam shot at point-blank range. Other than that, at least 3 Mississippi blacks were murdered because of their support for the civil rights movement. 4 people were critically wounded, 80 Freedom Summer workers were beaten, 1,062 people were arrested, 37 churches were bombed or burned, and 30 black homes or businesses were bombed or burned. This violence was caused by the White Citizen Council, KKK, and state and local government. Though Freedom Summer failed to register many voters, it had a significant effect on the course of the civil rights movement. It helped break down the decades of isolation and repression that were the foundation of the Jim Crow system. Before Freedom Summer, the national news media had paid little attention to the persecution of black voters in the Deep South and the dangers endured by the black civil rights workers. But when the lives of affluent northern white students were threatened, the full attention of the media spotlight was turned on the state. This evident disparity between the value that the media placed on the lives of whites and blacks embittered many black activists. Perhaps the most significant effect on the Freedom Summer was at the volunteers themselves, almost all of whom, black and white, still consider it to be one of the most defining moments of their lives.
The 24th Amendment was ratified in 1964. It then banned the poll that before kept the poor blacks from voting. This led to federal court making major decisions. Also, it made politics in the South skyrocket, and blacks can now vote without literacy tests. The meaning of one man, one vote then came into effect. African American voters rose from 7% to 70%. African American officials rose from 100 to 6,000. The Voting Rights of 1965 made the federal government oversee registrations in high discriminated areas, making sure nothing was holding the blacks back from voting.
The Watts riot was a civil disturbance in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles, California, August 11th through August 15th of 1965. This resulted in 34 deaths, 1,032 injuries, 3,438 arrests, and over $40 million in property damage. What started it all? August 11th of 1965, a man named Marquette Fry, which was a 21-year-old African-American man, was stopped by a California Highway Patrol officer named Lee Minikis on suspect of intoxicated driving. Minikis was convinced that Fry was indeed driving intoxicated and his car was to be impounded. Fry's brother Ronald, who was in the car as a passenger, walked home and brought his mother back with him. Officers attempted to subdue and arrest Fry, but as the situation went on, crowds grew larger, throwing objects at the officers. Due to this incident, 29 people were arrested. After this incident, a wild riot lasting until the 15th raged on, with African Americans destroying their neighborhood to protest an oppressive system. Black civil rights activist Baynard Rustin in his 1966 essay states, "The whole point in the outbreak in the Watts was that it marked the first major rebellion of Negroes against their own masochism, and was carried on with the express purpose of asserting that they would no longer quietly submit to the deprivation of slum life."
On April 4th, 1968, the assassination of Martin Luther King took place in Memphis, Tennessee. He made his I Have a Dream speech. He was trying to create civil rights for all Americans, no matter what race or color. He was part of the civil rights movement. He received a Nobel Peace Prize for all of his work. He was a world leader and led the bus boycott that lasted 382 days. During the days of the bus boycott, he was arrested and his home was bombed, and he was also subject to personal abuse. The significance of this movement was he was a hero and gave inspiration to people all over the world, and the results were he was assassinated.
The Black Panther Party started in 1966 in Oakland, California. This party was a symbol for young African Americans and to protect them from police abuse. by organizing armed patrol through the urban neighborhoods. It also created anti-poverty programs, for example, free breakfast for poor African American children. When the Black Panther Party went to Sacramento carrying shotguns and wearing black leather jackets to protest the attempts to restrain their rights to bear arms, the young African American style had changed. It changed to afros and black leather jackets, and they started to refer themselves as black instead of Negro or colored.
In Mississippi, Medgar Evers had a goal to desegregate Ole Miss. James Meredith won a court case ordering Ole Miss school to desegregate. Evers was assassinated on his front doorstep in June of 1963. Meredith was also shot just 3 years later. They both died fighting racial discrimination. The results in 160 injuries in the riot, 2 deaths in the riot. Both Meredith and Evers were killed too. Ole Miss does desegregate eventually.
Malcolm X was an African-American Muslim minister and human rights activist. As a prominent leader of the Nation of Islam, he advocated the nation's teachings, including that black people were the original people of the world and that white people were the quote-unquote devils. Though the civil rights movement fought against racial segregation, he promoted the complete segregation of African Americans from white people, and proposed the establishment of a separate country for African Americans as a temporary measure until they could be returned to Africa. X's speeches especially appealed to the emotion of his African American audiences who were tired of being told to wait for freedom, justice, equality. The civil rights movement policy of nonviolence, believing that African Americans should use any necessary means of self-defense. He was also accused of being an anti-Semitic extremist. He was a critic of the civil rights movement in general, describing leaders of the movement as quote-unquote stooges.